We are here to talk about LGBT philanthropy and what it means to our community. Where are we now and what can we do in the future? And I did hear, all kidding aside, about the discussions you had this morning about different generations of donors, engagement of marginalized groups, and how LGBT philanthropy is inherently different from some other forms of giving. We have a terrific panel for you today, no thanks to my doing, but to the organizers. And we're going to build on those insights that you had this morning and delve into the real-life experiences of our panelists. But just before we do that, I think it's useful to take a moment and really understand the crucial nature of what we're all doing here and how these discussions can impact our future and, importantly, the future of LGBT youth. I've been thinking a lot about the future lately and a lot about LGBT youth. For those of you who don't know, my partner Paul and I have recently become grandpas or grandgays or gaypas or something like that. It's an exciting and terrifying time that your child, who you were just wiping their nose and tying their skates a few months ago, it seems, is now in charge of another human being and it's not a doll. And I've been thinking about our grandson Henry and the world that he came into and the world that he will grow up in. And for all the challenges and problems we face, and there are many, Henry will have the unbelievable fortune to be born into a country where he will never know that no matter how he grows up, he will only ever know, rather, that no matter how he grows up, no matter who he chooses to love, and how he chooses to express that love, he will be fundamentally, absolutely equal with Canada. Henry and his friends will never know anything else. They'll only know a world where some have a mom and a dad, some two moms, some two dads, and yes, some even two grandpas. This is our true Canadian advantage, and it's one that we ought to be enormously proud of. This place, Canada, has changed. It's changed faster than other countries, and she's changed for the better. But our work isn't done. There's still more to do, and that's precisely the venue here where we can engage in the needed discussion to bring forward new ideas, to debate and disagree with each other and discuss how we continue to champion progress within our own community. Because whilst we've made some progress, we still face significant challenges. Our kids continue to kill themselves in record numbers. They continue to yearn for role models and mentors. Bullying continues to be a plague within our schools. Our community continues to have tremendous problems with substance abuse. And crucially for us today, we have yet to become a community of givers. I've raised money for this community for almost 30 years, like many of us in this room. And every time I set out to raise money, I have to gear myself, I have to steel myself for disappointment. So the letdown I'm going to get from all the people I've helped is to find a reason to be out of town or not answer my email. And while many of us lead in our professions and other communities, we don't always lead in the queer community. We haven't established ourselves as a community of leaders. We don't have the pillars and foundations yet that other groups have. But we're getting there. We're making great progress. And that's one of the things I think we can talk about today, how we can leave a better, more perfect, more philanthropic world for our children and even our grandchildren. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to say a few opening remarks before we get into discussion. This is going to be moderation light because we've got such a great, talented team of people to talk to with a real emphasis on their lived experience, their real life experience. So we're going to start with two questions and we'll ask each of the panelists to answer them briefly. What brought you into being involved in charitable giving, and tell us a little bit about your story. Who wants to go first?
All right. I want to thank Jay, I think. Jay, we met at the gay alumni thing for the spring reunion last year at U of T. So we exchanged cards, and all of a sudden, exchange cards, you get invited to a conference to talk. So I'm happy to be here. For those of you who didn't pick it up, I live in Washington, D.C. And for the better part of, well, let's say 35 years, I've commuted back and forth to Toronto to be a volunteer and a governor, and a donor, and now sort of a fundraiser for the University of Toronto. And yeah, that involves a lot of travel, and it's about the destination, not the journey these days. But I guess my experience, and I'm going to be brief because there's a lot of stuff we need to cover, is somebody asked me, Paul, we need somebody to be on a panel. We'd like a young alumnus, and that was like when I was a young alumnus. So I went on a panel, and up in Toronto. Well, Paul, we were wondering if you would come to another panel. Fine. Well, Paul, we really need some young alumni on the governing council. I said, I'm 34 years old. Everybody else on the governing council of the university, which is the Uber board, combines the board of governors and senate. Everybody else in their 60s. That's why we need somebody who's 34. Well, all right, but I live in Washington. So I come up, I get elected. I serve for 9 years. I get re-elected twice. Oh, and a better attendance, frankly, than some of the people who came from Bay Street. Not to make a fine point of it. So, you know, one good deed leads to another. I go off. Well, we're going to do a campaign. Paul, would you mind being on the group for engineering? Oh, that's very nice. Yeah, we'd like you to co-chair the Dean's Advisory Board. Oh, okay, I'll do that. Well, you get to chair a fundraising, you co-chair something, then you know your wallet is sort of out on the table, and then you get pitched by one of your favorite professors. We really like to have this great classroom. Oh, okay, well, that sounds wonderful. This is what will go on in the classroom. And every first-year student will be in that classroom taking the course that I invented years ago. I said, I hope you're not getting it. All of a sudden, there's a Cadario facility for integrated learning that's built right there where you walk in the engineering building and see it. Anyway, the point I'm sort of getting to is that you get on that volunteer escalator, and an organization that wants to raise money has got to look at this as advancement. And so our best donors are the people who know our story and can tell our story. And now I'm on the steering committee for engineering for Boundless, which aims to raise $2 billion. And you know, my name will be on something. And it's sort of, you know, now I get to go to meetings with people that are learning about the university. Well, you want to meet a volunteer. And I'm described as a volunteer. You wanted to meet a volunteer, and I'm the one who's brought out to the new person. So I guess my advice based on my story is the more you know about an organization, the more that you're given opportunities to contribute without money, the more likely it is you're going to get money. And I think that over the course of one's life, and particularly as one becomes able to give more, that is really what's meaningful because you've established meaning in that relationship. And there are people, and you become an example, younger alumni. Now, there are two, and I'll just finish by saying there are two diversity things that I want to mention because I think it's quite important. When they set up the Dean's Advisory Board for Engineering, I go to the first meeting, the guy who set it up says to me, what do you think of the Dean's Advisory Board? And I said, well, it's too old, it's too white, and it's too male. You know, I was like maybe 4 years old, and I brought the average age down to about 60. And over the course of years, you know, women got brought on, and then we decided we brought it down. So that's very important. Then, when I was president of the Alumni Association, which just happened because somebody called and said, we need you to be. And I said, I have to think about it. You always say yes, just say yes, get on with it. I don't live in Toronto, it doesn't matter. So I became president of the Alumni Association. The next thing that happens, in a U of T magazine, the president of the university says, well, we're so pleased in his quarterly letter, we're so pleased to have Paul Cadario as not only the first president of the UTAA to live outside the GTA, but the first openly gay president of the University of Toronto Alumni Association. So I'm outed to 1 million people. All right, fine, whatever. Then Kyle Winters, who was here yesterday, says, Paul, we want to do the first gay affinity event for the Alumni Association. Great idea. We're going to do it at the Drake Hotel. Great, I've never been there. I don't live in Toronto. So I go to the Drake Hotel one very snowy night, and there are 200 gay alumni. I think Ken remembers, or Doug remembers, and I think Ken remembers. And sort of, well, not only is this the first event, and there are 200 gay and lesbian alumni, but you have the gay president of the University of Toronto Alumni Association welcoming everybody to the first event. And I did that with young alumni. I did that with alumni outside Toronto who needed a reason to get together. So it's a matter of figuring out an affinity and saying, I don't care where you paid your tuition. If you identify with the black students, you should be in the Black Alumni Association. So let's set one up. But I think that finding affinity about a cause is rather important.
Thank you.
The way I got into philanthropy was I'm part of a family foundation. My grandfather started it, and my father and his brother ran it for years. And then in about 2003, my dad asked me if I wanted to start working in it. I was not out then. And they started paying me to do it. And my interest, my current passion was the arts. I am an artist, and I had always been interested in the arts, as many people in my family were. But in 2009, I came out, and I realized, well, you know, we support a couple of LGBT things in our foundation, but not a lot, you know. So I started just looking up a lot of, and trying to meet with a lot of people in the LGBT community that had causes that we might be interested in, particularly in the arts, and somewhat in social services too. And I became very, you know, passionate about that. There are also other people in my family who came out already. So that, you know, I've grown up knowing a lot of gay men, not too many gay women, but so that's why I got involved with philanthropy, and particularly the LGBT community around philanthropy. And my brother had already supported Casey House and Asian African initiatives, so that was already in the portfolio. But now I'm very excited about being involved with a lot of the organizations within Toronto that support LGBT causes.
So just maybe a little context, which will maybe inform later remarks, but I think my path is maybe traditional. Growing up, my parents, you know, as part of a church religious sort of angle, parents always were about giving back, not in writing big checks, but more about helping people, giving back in that way. So kind of had that the grounding or base. Get to university, big emphasis on giving, those types of things. Get to TD, which you might have picked up. It's the only place I've ever worked. So turns out at TD, a big emphasis on giving and involving. I mean, you have to want to do it, but lots of support if you want to do it. And then in particular, one of my bosses early on, I watched her, and she had 2 young children. She had a very busy job, and she was involved in everything constantly. And she, explained multiple times how important it was. Kind of going back to Jaime's remarks, we live in Canada. We're very fortunate to be here. All the people ahead of us gave back. If we don't, who will? And I've never really forgotten that. So I think it's imperative that many of us are very fortunate. We do have to give back. So that kind of informs my general giving thoughts. And then in particular on LGBT, I'd say again, as time has moved on, recognizing there are some very big needs in this community, and I guess to be honest, we have to rely on allies a lot, which I think is important. But I think it's really important if people in this community can step up. It's almost kind of looking after yourself, not personally, but ourselves in a broader sense.
I think that's a really crucial point. So maybe we'll just focus the next question a little bit and focus it within the LGBT community and a lot to that the HIV/AIDS community as well. And we'll start with Sarah this time. And just what are your interests, giving interests within those communities?
Within HIV and
AIDS and LGBT, and or.
Yeah, I guess again, because I'm really into the arts, we do. I looked at one of the first things I looked at was places like Buddies, Inside Out, those organizations, and then my brother actually manages a social services portfolio, but I kind of would bring ideas to him around maybe other organizations that we could look at, and he knew more about especially the AIDS in Africa initiatives, but I started to get more interested and involved in that, and I think one of the things that impressed me when I started going out and meeting people was just how much need there was, how appreciative people were. Sorry, hard to hear. Yeah, sorry. How appreciative people were of our support, also getting a foundation interested in an LGBT organization seemed to be a little unusual. And I often, sometimes people come to me, but I was going up to people initially and asking to meet with them. So I remember particularly buddies, they were surprised to hear from us, but yeah, so I think, yeah, and I guess I got very, also because of running this coming out group here, the stories I've heard just blew me away about some of the struggles people are going through, particularly in other countries, but even here today, you know, for younger women coming from certain communities, Muslim, you know, certain backgrounds, the struggles they are still going through shocked me at how hard it is for them to come out, to be able to, you know, to live out, and the fact that they may lose all the support from their families, etc. That really touched me a lot. So I started to get very interested in those issues, women's issues, the role of sexism and how women are treated in, you know, within our community or outside our community or around the world. And to a certain extent also trans issues and poverty, you know, those really came forward. And people of color and how the struggles they go through.
And as you look at the out years, do you imagine that your giving interests will broaden outside those communities, focus within them?
I'm dealing with a board that is, you know, it's a mixed board, so I have to kind of sell stuff to them, and there's only a certain percentage they will tolerate, I think, of this area, but, you know, I'm working on it, and they're coming around. You know, it takes time, right? I mean, my grandfather was very conservative, and my dad was much more liberal and, you know, brought in the arts, and now this is kind of a new phase, so there's a slow shift within the board, but my daughter's just joined the board, and I'm hoping, you know, over time, as we've heard, you know, the younger generation, it's not, they have a very different approach and attitude towards LGBT, so I'm hoping that, you know, that shift will keep evolving over time, and I would like to keep supporting those areas as much as possible.
So Tim, same two questions to you. Within the LGBT community and the HIV/AIDS community, where are your interests? What have you been thinking about? And then playing that forward, do you imagine in the out years your interests will coalesce or they'll broaden out to other?
Yeah, I think you know, looking back, I did some work with Casey House, and that was really there were kind of two things that kind of drove that. One was it felt like it was a, you know, a very specialized, interesting answer to a problem, and so I wanted to understand that. And I was also kind of interested. I'd never been involved in anything to do with sort of healthcare, and so I just wanted to kind of learn about how all that works. So that kind of drove that involvement. Kind of the other bucket of things I've traditionally thought about is, I guess my experience growing up, and when I look across, you know, friends and family and stuff like that, I see, you know, I think education is kind of the answer to almost everything. And when it doesn't happen, you think some of those stats that Sonia put up around suicide, and you know, you hear about people who've been kicked out of their family, no support mechanisms. I mean, you know, that sort of 15 to 24 period is so important, and ensuring you have support and education, because it will really determine what happens for the rest of your life. So that kind of age, I think, is really important. So looking for ways to support initiatives that happen in that age, things around bullying, things around, you know, whatever, homelessness, those types of things. I actually think, and this is going to sound really, really self-interested, but one of the things, and this might be a recency effect as well, but just recently we had a presentation from a US-based organization that was talking about, you know, they're set up to talk about what happens in the later years. Right? So if you're in the LGBT community, what happens as aging happens. And it turns out, you know, a lot of the stuff, again, that Sonia was mentioning, that does actually persist. And I'm not sure everyone thinks about that a lot. I'm not sure the world's set up for it. I don't know whether the world's set up for it, but I don't know whether anyone's thinking about it. So I guess probably over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've actually been mulling that a bit about, well, what does this look like? What does it look like when you have a world that more people are out? And then when you're 80, how does that sort of transpire? And do you just need more inclusive retirement homes, or do you need LGBT retirement homes? I don't know the answer, but I worry that I'm not sure anybody is actually thinking about that, or thinking about that in Canada.
Especially with some cute boys working in those
I know.
retirement homes.
Little 18-year-olds coming in the back to dinner. Samia?
Room service and bowls. Oh.
Well, I was very inspired by what your colleague from UJA about the family based on what you know about one of them. My partner gives money to his university and to gay and Jewish political causes. I give money to the University of Toronto. That's how the household splits. It's charitable. And I think when I heard her say that, I said, you need to keep in mind that as you go and look at gay or lesbian or transgender donors, that they have a family situation that you also have to understand, and that you must not make assumptions about that just because I'm a middle-aged gay man, I gave a lot of money. Well, for tax reasons and for policy reasons, because you can't give money if you're a foreigner in the United States to a political cause. It's not allowed. We went to a whole lot of those dinners when there were issues of gay money then, or rather damning. But, and I think it was on one of the sessions this morning, in the post-gay marriage era, are we actually still putting our money there? And the answer is no. And neither are any of our friends. And it's not that, well, the drawbridge, we're in the castle, we're live the drawbridge. I think that there's a certain interest, if you still believe in that, to give money to political parties and to candidates. But again, I'm not American, I'm not allowed to. And not living in Canada, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to give money to people here, political causes here. But I think that whole, the drawbridge is, we're in the castle, the drawbridge is up, is in the, in a middle-aged male donor community. That is very true in the United States, and I'm glad people who are thinking about it. What do you do next? Because there are all these political needs, the group, and social needs that groups like you that are in this room need support for, other than just calling it an MP or an MLA.
All right, questions from the audience? I got lots more, so
Go for it.
yeah.
It's not a question, it's just to answer. There's a really cool project in Ottawa right now that's being headed up by Centretown Community Health Center, Marie Robertson, on seniors, LGBT seniors in aging in Ontario. And they're doing so many cutting edge and groundbreaking work. And often in Ottawa, we don't get to see that. So I'm really excited because not only I just think for all of us as we're queer and we age and thinking about like, do we go into homes, are they going to create separate communities for lower income artists? Like they're exploring all these questions. How do we go to an organization like, what do they call it, Seniors Companions? The Companions, so they make partnerships with good companions to go in and do all of that education of the next generation of straight people, so that there can be space for queer community. So I just want to say for all of you, because we haven't talked a lot about seniors issues at this conference, these are really good projects. So just find Marie Robertson in Ottawa if you're interested about some cool stuff happening with seniors.
Yeah.
I'll just piggyback on that. I sit on the LGBT Seniors Housing Committee in Edmonton, and we're just hired a researcher and our final symposium for next year on housing in Edmonton.
Well, this is ancient history now, but when we were bringing in reforms to all the different pieces of legislation that affected LGBT people in this province, one of the things that I was surprised we had to fix was the Nursing Home Bill of Rights Act, which provides that couples have to be housed in a particular way, they have to have access to each other, so on. And this, of course, didn't apply to us. And one of those things I thought, in those sweeping changes, which now see ancient history. Yes.
Well, I'm Jaime. I'm selling with Sunshine Center for Seniors, and we're doing a lot of work with LGBT seniors, and including intergenerational programs with youth, seniors, and anyone listening as well. And I'm also part of here. There's a senior pride network that runs at Pride 19 and Pride 19 Philippines. And we're doing a lot of work around education in long-term care facilities and advocacy and that kind of thing. So I guess I just want to say all of this stuff happening also around LGBT.
See, Ottawa, you don't have it all. Brent.
As people prepare proposals to come to you for donations, what do you like to see in those proposals, and what things stand out for you, and what do you say yes?
And can I also add, what pisses you off? Right? What don't you want to see? What makes you mad? I know what makes me mad when I see those things. But you all right.
Well, usually, so anything that falls within our mandate, which is sort of on our website. Also, I think, for me personally, I like to really meet with someone and see what you're doing. I like to really have a sense of what you're working on and see it in action. That helps me make an informed decision. And yeah, I do feel it's all about the relationship that you develop with someone else. And so a lot of people, I've heard at the conference a lot about the ask. The ask is really important, and the relationship. And that, to me, the best relationships I've built are with people where they often came to me and said, I want to meet with you, and we sit down. I get lots of proposals across my table, right? But if there's that kind of personal connection, I like that. And then I really want to see what you're doing so that I can make an informed decision. Things that piss me off, mainly just when people don't follow up. So that stewardship aspect of the really good organizations and good fundraisers realize it's about relationships. It's about developing relationships, making sure that the fit is right with what your foundation is doing. And those are the organizations that I tend to like to support. And the proof is usually in the pudding. You go and see, and you either see they're doing very innovative programming, or you see they're really making a difference, or they have a vision. A lot of organizations don't have a vision. There's no vision. There's no one at the top overseeing things and going, let's try this, right? So it's amazing actually how rare that is in my experience. If you have a vision, if you have a great person at the top, that helps a lot. It trickles down, right? It often trickles down within the organization. So, yeah.
Paul, what do you like to see and what don't you like to see?
Well, I like to see volunteers who remember that the people that were hired to run the organization. I'm on enough boards where boards forget that, there's an executive director, there is a chair, there is somebody, but I'm not very sympathetic to my board colleagues who forget that there's a boundary or the board of management. That I think, and I think that at every board, the executive director will find allies against board members who are trying to forget what their role is. That I like to see board members who realize what their role is. I do not like phone calls at home, particularly from organizations that I've told that to before. If you look in your record, you'll see that when you phoned last year, I said, don't phone at home if you have something. We don't give money over the phone. Send us something right. And I'm sorry that's going to cost you $1, but you're not going to get anything on the phone, so your rate of return is probably higher. I hate to say that, but that you told them that before. And then if they tell them that again, just say, no, I'm not giving you any more money. So that's one thing I don't like to see.
Maybe just echoing some of those comments here. I think we should look in the mirror and just recognize that fundamentally this is a sales skill, and selling was created 100 years ago. Like, there's a formula, we know how it works, and it's all about the relationship. You build a relationship, like this has been done. So if you don't think it's sales, I think you're thinking about it wrong. It is sales, and there are lots of books on how you do that, and there are lots of people in the world who know how you do that. So I think fundamentally, if you get that, then it'll all happen appropriately. But I think maybe a little more generically, kind of I see two buckets. I see there's kind of the operational, you need money to run the organization, doing everything the organization does. Sometimes that's harder to get excited about. So that's where the relationship's really important. Because it's going to be hard to get me really excited about, give me $10,000 to help with this, making sure that the lights are on every week. Hard to get excited. So that's where, again, relationships are really important. Then I think the other bucket of, let's call it special projects, maybe, but Jaime is working with is, an iconic building, making a statement. Pretty easy to get excited. So, that's a different way to do it, and I think that can be a quicker, more direct ask because, there is some tangible excitement around it. So I think thinking about what the ask is, the nature of the ask, those types of things is very important. It's a bit of a, going back to sales, it's a bit of a know your audience thing. Know what you got, know what you're selling, know who your audience is, and how to do it accordingly.
And I would just have a slight version of that, enhancement of that, which is no boilerplate, right? If people just crank out, cut and paste, sometimes with the previous donor's name in it, but they forget. And but when you see, if you're going to ask them for money, which by definition, everybody who gives away money gets more asks than they have money to give, put a little bit of effort in it, right? And I'm not a prima donna. My given name has been misspelled for over 50 years, right? I don't get worked up about it at all. If I did, I'd be crappy my entire life. It's not worth it. But it pisses me off when I get a letter from someone who wants money from me and they can't even spell Jaime correctly, right? It's these little things that are actually significant, I think. No, I can't.
The same idea. I just want to know, are you open to donating to organization outside of Ontario? There are associations for African people located in Montreal, but I never thought of trying to ask for organizations that are located outside of the province. So that's the question.
I'm just so excited you asked that because it's one of the things that I think about a lot. So sometimes, if you think about it again, where I might be interested in doing things or new things, and sometimes it's really important when we give money to our community, which usually is defined where we live within 30 kilometers or something. But I think, again, going back to this concept, Canada, I think we have a greater obligation here. And, just even on the seniors thing, so I just heard Edmonton, Ottawa, Toronto. I hope all of you people are talking because sometimes, that's where great things can happen. And I'm always much more interested when someone comes to me and says, you know what, we're doing this. And by the way, we're talking to somebody in Montreal and we're trying to do something together. And that to me feels great. You can't do it all the time, but I think to the extent that kind of relationship or that broader pan-Canadian thinking can come into play, I think it would be great. I think sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard just because of geography to do something in Vancouver. I get it. But I think at least here in this part of the country, we should always have an eye on Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa. That is to me a natural area that we should be thinking of all Canadians in that catchment area and doing something. So you want to give me a call? No problem.
There you go. Anybody else got a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think there's a LGBT cause for that all Canadians should rally behind right now since the marriage debate is kind of not an issue anymore? We've been talking for 2 days about sort of fracturing LGBT community, diversity within diversity, culture within culture. Someone wrote down on another session earlier, there's no one big cause for the LGBT community in Canada anymore. Do you agree, yes or no? Can you come up with another thought?
The two things I keep hearing that people are concerned about within the community are queer youth, and particularly a shelter that's LGBT based, because a lot of queer youth don't feel safe in shelters. And I think the seniors thing too, those two seem to be, I've heard those a lot, those two concerns. And I know there's a lot of, there's stuff in the paper about a shelter maybe happening. I don't know if that's in Toronto, for, a queer youth shelter. So I don't know, maybe queer youth, I'm not sure.
Yeah, again, I'd probably echo that sentiment. I think sort of young and old maybe to think about it, but I think maybe we might have to think about it differently because I think if you look at the youth area and suicide and bullying and stuff, it isn't just an LGBT issue. So we're going to have to think about it and frame it slightly differently. I think it has to be, ironically, a more inclusive discussion. It can't just be LGBT focused, and I don't think it should be either. So that might be a little different because again, fighting for the right to marry felt quite focused on the community. So maybe we just need to be appreciative and think about that differently. If we're looking for some bigger cause, if you will.
Paul?
I want to agree very much with Tim that marriage was a big ticket item in Canada. It happened relatively easily. United States, there's still 31 states where it's not legal, and that will happen because of the law. That doesn't mean that once marriage is done, it's all done. It's all over. I think that any bullying concern that is continental now, and actually I think in Western Europe, started off as gauged. But then because it got such visibility, it involves every parent and every kid in every school. And people are talking about bullying, which surely must help everybody. And looking at issues to do with seniors or the homeless strikes me as sort of broader social justice issues. And as Tim said, a more inclusive approach by organizations that hitherto have just focused on LGBT issues would attract a different group of a broader group of donors, and indeed might come up with allies that would make the whole effort easier. Because it was about everybody and not just gay youth. It's about youth that for whatever reason are homeless, or it's about elderly people who are poor, whether they're gay or straight, and doing better for the elderly and for people who don't want to move into a retirement home, want to live in their own area. So what is the community in an urban area doing about that? And the energy that the gay community has so successfully mobilized about our issues could broaden out a bit, and then that would help our issues, but it would also help everybody's issues. And so the lifting on the gay part wouldn't have to necessarily be as heavy. That's not to say, okay, let's sort of get rid of all the gay organizations, but I think there's a lot of skill and a lot of community building, a lot of partnership experience in the LGBT community that would benefit the broader community.
So to answer your question just in the narrow sense, I really like bullying as an issue. It is a universal issue. And what I like about it is that it allows us to lead, right? In almost all of these other issues, we ride someone else's wash, to use, a canoeing analogy, right? We're tucked in behind the best, but we actually have, as a community, and Helen is in the back of the room not paying attention to us, but she's a leading, but Helen is a leading expert in this issue, and she has, as other people do, I just know her well, but she has a great expertise that she can bring to educators and to youth groups and to all kinds of people all around the country as well. So it's a chance to do what I was talking about at the beginning, and that is to create a community of leaders. We need more people to lead if we're going to sustain the progress that we have and we're going to move forward.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested. I mean, all of you have been involved in philanthropy for a number of years in different ways. And I'm wondering about mentorship and that idea of, for the people just a little bit behind you, maybe a decade or two, but behind you, what are your thoughts on how people who have a lot of experience with giving can support that generation of people who are starting to,
That's a great question.
money as they get older?
Yeah, I think if you're on a board, you need to say to your board members, why is there nobody 20 years younger than us on this board? And what are we going to do to attract the right folk? And which of us is going to mentor that person so that when term limits happen and several of us have to go off the board, we have somebody ready to be the secretary and then the treasurer and then the vice president. The president who's at that point younger than we are today. So you have to do that. And it's not just a matter of putting them on the board, it's finding the right people, making sure that they succeed, and then getting them to bring their friends along. That's succession management.
Yeah, I think of two things. So one is, I actually believe, I don't know if it's true or not, but I actually believe it's a learned behavior, and people have to be taught. And so hopefully your parents, your family do it, but that doesn't always happen. So big organizations can help do that. Again, my organization, they have things in place to help inculcate that in the employees. But even there, I think simple things. If you think about, again, a big organization, we have, this United Way program. You go online and you can, through this United Way website, you can actually pick the charities you want to give to, right? So it would be really cool, I know everyone wants to take this on, but it'd be really cool if, for example, through our LGBT site, whether, we could post something, say, here's a bunch of LGBT charities, in case you didn't know. So when you're doing your United Way clicking, if you want to give to the LGBT causes, here's a list of them, because people may not know. And by the way, if you do that, again, connecting that for people, it's a simple way to do it. But I think, again, we have to teach people how to do that. So whether, mentoring is your word, but, other ways to do that. Again, I don't know all those different ways we can do it, but I do think that's how it actually happens. The second thing I'd say is, and this might be going back to the question around one of the things that bugs me, is, we shouldn't just look at individuals as checkbooks or money transfers, because people have lots of things they can give. And again, if they're a young person, they have energy, they have creativity, they have all kinds of things that they can give. So I think we have to be creative in how we use people and think about people. It's not just for the money. Because if you get someone involved young and they do a great job, they give $10, then that can convert into $100,000 20 years later if they're successful. So I think that's another convention. And I think going back to what bugs me, too often it feels like really, we're just wrapping all this up because you want my money, but you know what, I actually have lots to give a your organization. I can think about how do you deal with bureaucracy. I can think of lots of different ways to give something. So again, I think on the other side of that, being creative around that, especially around younger people, is important.
So do you want to get on this?
Yeah, well, one of the things I was interested in, the panel I went to yesterday, which was Women in Philanthropy. There was Naomi, can't remember her last name, but from New York, who deals with younger people either coming into money or giving. And so I'm very interested in that she's doing that. And I think the intergenerational thing is really important. I think in our community it's really important too, that we somehow foster more, the elders have a lot to offer. And to start, pairing up people, older LGBT with younger people that are either, whether it's in philanthropy or, in other areas is very important. And yeah, I think a discussion about how that could happen would be great. How we could kind of get that happening more. But I mean, in my family, I'm just really happy that my daughter has come on board, because that is the next generation, and she's going to have ideas for things that, that I don't. So I'm interested in where she's coming from, but I think it'd be great to take that out into a larger context too, and I think it's really important. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other as we go through when we look at the different generations. So I think it's, very essential.
I'd just like to build on Sarah's point. I've been thinking a lot lately about the relative lack of success that some of our women political leaders have been having lately, and wondering if there is something structural or systemic in the way they're supported, mentored, encouraged, helped, whatever. And in thinking about that, I thought about, I think one of the incredible advantages that gay men have, and that's just because that's my lived experience, so it likely takes place amongst women as well. But for years and years and years, there's been these very important intergenerational relationships amongst gay men. And they came about for a very good reason. Because if you were at work and you made a mistake and you outed yourself or something, you'd get fired, or you'd get thrown out of your house, or you'd have something else. So older gay men would spot, younger gay men as they came into the law firm or the bank or wherever, and these informal networks began to be formed. And sometimes maybe the older guys had other ideas, but generally speaking, right, these were very important relationships, and these young men got tremendous advantages. They got to socialize and experience and get mentored by people that in straight relationships just wouldn't happen. So we actually know how to do that, right? And we actually know how to reach out and mentor these kids. And we've got a powerful way that's part of our DNA and our archetype and our cultural imprint on how to do it. And I think we can think about that in a different way than we have in the past. The other thing too, which I know most of your organizations do, is the whole friend-raising idea, especially with young people. That you don't need to get money from them right away, right? There may be a time when they get started, you might want $25 from them or something, but just start building friendship networks. And I started one in London, Ontario 20 years ago, and now it is just, those people are amongst the top donors to that particular hospital. Another way to do it. Brent, next.
You talked about this is a time for institutional building in our community. And I know a lot of the organizations the last couple of days have talked about not having the infrastructure, either not having the database, or the staff training, or the leadership training, or the volunteer management. Are any of you interested in receiving proposals or having other suggestions that you might offer to organizations that need some money to build that infrastructure so that they can either become more self-sustaining over time, develop their membership base or database over time, instead of just one-off project funding, institutional building funding?
Okay, I'll take that. Yeah, so again, the institutional building tends to probably more of the, talk about those two buckets of the special project or the day-to-day thing. It's probably more that day-to-day bucket, but that's where I would go back to the relationship support that, if you develop a relationship and you can identify the vision and the need and all those types of things, that kind of resonates at that point. It's much harder to kind of just drop in with the letter saying, I need $10,000 to get the new land on the road.
certainly, TD and a lot of organizations like World Bank and World Bank Global. And that was a group of people who got the mentoring, but also the fact that there was an organizational structure meant that some of those member bank staff colleagues had interests in the community and, we know they need somebody to help clean up their donor list, or, we're involved in a March with the Homeless, will you join us? So that I think that to the extent you have volunteers that are plugged in to the TD banks and the IBMs, they have affinity groups that are really, sort of platinum standard by many in organizations, particularly IBMs, which is one of the first. That's a really good source of volunteers to do the sort of thing, and you might not be able to get money as students that we don't like that bucket as well as we like the other bucket. But at the same time, you got all these volunteers that they're being encouraged by their employers to give back. So go after it.
Yeah, for example, like from Navigator, two of my colleagues, Andrew and Jeff, are here, and we give that kind of expertise away to LGBT youth all the time, right? We don't always write them a check, but we're very happy to help within our area of expertise, solve problems that they have. And I think you'll find lots of people are quite generous that way. Other question? Yeah.
I want to go back to the kind of philanthropic or key philanthropic issues that might exist in our community for a moment. We know in our community that one of the most marginalized and highest needs group in our community is trans people. And yet they didn't get mentioned, was queer youth and seniors. How do we move funders to those places that they don't see in our community that happen to be perhaps our highest needs portions of the community?
I would say I think through the information, through education, as people have said, becoming aware of those issues. I'm aware that trans youth are, there's a big problem there. They are one of the most, struggle the most with poverty and different things, often because they're kicked out of the house, etc. But I think, educating people about it, and I think there's still this, trans is still, kind of within certain groups, it's still this kind of place that's a little uncomfortable or not understood completely. So I think, personally, I feel like the education part is really important to let people know this is part of our community. These are our people, that are struggling, and we need to help them. And just as there are all these, often these marginalized groups, right? And the only way I know to do that is through information and education, and then also letting your donors know this is an area we really need to deal with. We need to look at this. It's sort of being ignored, or it's being pushed under the carpet, or whatever. I think.
You might reframe maybe one of the earlier questions around, what's the bigger sort of public policy issue, marriage, whatever. I'd say maybe within the LGBT community, trans needs to be out. We should adopt that as our thing, but just for our community, because I think it's going to be harder for the other 90% of the world to completely understand that. I think our community should figure that out first. So I think there should be some kind of momentum around that, and find the right people as well, hard work to get that happening. But that might be a rallying point just for.
Paul, anything to add?
Well, I'm happy with hearing the word marginalized, unless the group uses that to describe themselves. It sounds very disempowering and frankly sort of offensive. Underserved, hidden. There are all sorts of words that might be a little more, to me, maybe I'm not the only one, that might be more satisfactory in terms of here's a need that we can help with. Without turning it, if I may coin a term, philanthropy for it. That sounds a little too blunt, I'm sorry, but let's educate ourselves and let's go see what we can do with broader issues.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask, is there a kind of global perspective within the community? Of course, there's a lot of work still to be done in Canada, but in some countries there's death penalty now. Is there a sense that Canada is in a wealthy position and there's actually also responsibility to try and help out similar communities in the developing world?
Any questions on that?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that, I mean, what I see from the groups here that I've come to at 519 is the fact that, you know, refugees can come here is huge. They are amazed when they come here at how much freedom they can experience, given what they've experienced in their countries that they came from. And I don't know within the community I don't know how many donors are interested in that, but I've become very interested in that. And I think, you know, what's happening in Africa generally is, you know, a huge concern, right? And most of the people that I'm meeting are either coming from places like Iran or Nigeria or Africa or the Caribbean. But I know that, for instance, the Stephen Rose Foundation is doing a lot of work around advocacy and changing laws, which is one of the things that needs to happen, right? So I think there are Canadians working on it, but whether it's, I don't know, what other issues that people are aware of and trying to work on it.
Paul?
Well, as a retiree from the World Bank, I get to go and say what I want at World Bank spring meetings, which is nice now. Certainly, the ones that took place in Washington 2 weeks ago, there was a huge focus on human rights, which included LGBT rights because of the issue in Uganda, which apparently the World Bank's going to back down and maybe fund that project. It's a complicated issue. But as Canadians, you know, please remember, Canada is a very important part of the World Bank and the UN. And as Canadians, you have members of Parliament and you have a Minister of Foreign Affairs who's very conscious of these issues and has indeed spoken about them. And you haven't phoned your MP or written a letter, you ought to. Because that's where the pressure comes from on any of these international development issues. That's how it becomes mainstream. And you know, to the extent that your organizations are comfortable with taking political stands as part of your advocacy role, that's where it will do the most good in the short term. Because eventually, just like gender and the environment and corruption and military expenditures, issues to do with human rights and LGBT rights will become part of the international development agenda. And countries like Uganda or Nigeria will find themselves sort of isolated if they continue to treat a part of their population that way or allow people to treat their LGBT citizens that way. And the only way that happens is it becomes internationally unacceptable to do things like that. And it's up to places like Canada where it is not acceptable to discriminate and to oppress and to create violence. It's up to Canada and other countries to make that point and make it over and over again until it's heard.
Anyone have a last question? Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe a bigger picture of philanthropy. So there are a few questions. There's lots that we talk about. We need a knowledge bank. We need more data. But there are a lot of small organizations and there are large ones. So we have kind of responsibility as a member of a community to touch as much of that community as possible in the framework of the percentage of our giving that we allocate to us? Or are you more influenced by large projects? So what I'm trying to get at is for a small agency that perhaps has a $500,000 budget, are you more receptive if they come with an ask that's proportionate to the size of their organization? So maybe a $5,000 grant versus asking for a big budget item of $100,000, which you might prefer to allocate to a building project. So how does it influence your decision as trying to touch as much of the community as possible and make it as strong as possible?
Maybe I'll answer this. So I'm going to give you two diametrically opposed answers. So on one hand, for me anyhow, I like to see a cause and effect. So if I'm giving money, I can see how it happens, which maybe is the global question. I have a harder time seeing how if I get $1,000 to help with the global issue, how that's going to actually really make a difference, because I think it's a government issue, really. So it's going to be harder for me to do that. But if I can see, if there's a smaller, if you have a very focused problem, and this $1,000 is going to make a massive difference, I can get very, very interested. The flip side of that, I'll give you the dimension of course that is, but you also want to make sure that what's your maximum impact. So you kind of think about that too. So it's harder to kind of be involved with and follow and be interested with 100 different small projects. It's much easier to kind of focus on one thing. So that's probably a really bad answer, but I think that's kind of honestly, there's kind of always that tension. But again, I'm very interested when I can see something that's more local, and you can see how this small group of people is banding together to really solve this issue in a very creative, interesting way. And there's no other way that someone's going to fund that. That's very worthy. But again, it's sort of it's, like I said, this tension.
Yeah, I would say with our foundation anyway, we don't have huge grants that we give out, so I would agree with you that the smaller, the grants where, $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000, whatever it is really going to make a huge difference in a project. Those are very engaging, and sometimes, they're multi-year grants. The bigger grants, like the one-time grants, will go more towards often a new building or a new initiative. But it doesn't have the same impact over time necessarily. So I find those smaller, really kind of intense projects that need to happen right now. We need this new thing. We want to do this new thing, but we can't get anyone on side. And this is something I'm really excited about. I find those those kind of projects engaging.
And we'll give the last word to Paul.
Well, that's not a space I operate in, but I think that the ask has to be about the future. And if you talk about, we're going to close if we don't get, well, what is that about? But the ask is about the future, and the clearer you and your board are about where your organization is going and what need you're serving with some of the techniques we heard yesterday about storytelling and and good stewardship. That there are no questions for CRA about the tax return, and you put it on your website because you want everybody to see it. I think there are good rules here in Canada about that. You talk about the future, it's easier to make the ask, and the more you talk about the future, the easier it is to go and ask more people, even if the first one said, well, actually, it's a little big for us, or well, not this year, but come back next year. And that's, I think, a good rule on philanthropy, whether you're looking for small money or big money, whether you're a big organization or small.
Well, it's pretty easy to sum up this panel. I think we've heard from all of the panelists about how personal this whole approach is, and how everybody is different, and so that your asks and the way you approach your donors needs to be highly personalized as well. I think the good news about that is my granny turned out to be right, as she is on most things, or was on most things, and that there's a lip for every pot, right? There's somebody out there who's got an interest which will match yours. And the trick is prospecting that, refining that, and making that ask. So on your behalf, let me thank Tim and Sarah and Paul for being with us today, and hopefully we're providing you some insight that at least matched that which you got this morning at that other band panel. Thank you very much.